Good morning, Staples High School in Connecticut. Where in Connecticut are you?
We're in Westport, Connecticut.
Okay. Well, my name is Tandy McConnell. I'm honored to be here with you. We're joining together from all over the country. For about 20 years, I was a professor of history at Columbia College in Columbia, South Carolina. But a few years ago, I decided to do something more interesting. So I'm right now teaching high school in Columbia, South Carolina. That's been exciting and fun. I'm teaching. I'm not right now teaching the We the People course, but it's an awesome course, and I'm really glad to be part of this experience. I'm going to ask my colleagues, my fellow judges, to introduce themselves. So, if Miriam, you'll introduce yourself, and you're muted.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Miriam Memar-Sadeghi, and I participated in We the People the very first year that it was offered many years ago on the bicentennial of the US Constitution. And I'm originally from Iran. I came to the United States when I was 7 years old, and I have spent my career, or the majority of my career, providing civic education and support to civil society in Iran.
And Michael, would you introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks, Sandy. My name is Michael DePiero. I'm with the Florida Department of Education, and I am very happy to be here and excited to hear what you all have to say and prepared. Thank you.
And would our presenters introduce themselves, and if you would introduce your teacher as well, please.
Good morning. We're Unit 1 from Staples High School in Westport, Connecticut. My name is Zach Bishop.
I'm Elizabeth Kuhndorf.
I'm Thomas Sargent, and this is our wonderful teacher, Mrs. Kammerman.
And a wonderful teacher, I'm sure she is, although I don't think we can see her. Well, let's get down to business, shall we? We are your Unit 1 judges. We're interested in the philosophical and historical foundations of the American political system. We are asking question 1. And I quote, "The American War is over, but this is far from being the case with the American Revolution." A quotation from Benjamin Rush. To what extent, if any, did revolutionary principles influence constitution making during the founding period? What problems, if any, does the principle of consent present when creating or amending constitutions? To what extent, if any, are revolutionary principles evident in modern times? Please begin.
Benjamin Rush noted that even after independence, one of the 2 doors of tyranny remained open under the Articles, which need to be closed by restructuring the government. Constitution making during the founding period was influenced mostly by 3 prominent revolutionary principles: natural rights, limited government, and consent of the governed.
After years of Britain's violations of natural rights, the framers grew compelled to safeguard their own life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. 2 of the many clauses protecting these liberties in the Constitution are Article 3, Section 2, Clause 3, the right to trial by jury, and Article 1, Section 9, Clause 2, which protects the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus. It also included a Bill of Rights that reinforced state constitutions, which protected similar liberties, drawing heavily from Article 1, Section 12 of the Virginian Constitution as the basis for the First Amendment. The revolutionary ideal of a limited government stemmed from Britain's arbitrary use of power, leading the founders to create mechanisms to prevent the expansion of national government. As Madison notes in Federalist 51, the Constitution's structure exemplifies limited government because federalism allows for the power surrendered by the people to be divided because 2 governments and then subdivided among separate governments. A double security is essential in preventing the expansion of power.
The principle of consent implies that a government is only legitimate if it reflects in the popular will of both its possession and execution of power. The constitutional ratifying convention succeeded in upholding this principle as they represented more of the populace, as states like New York waived property requirements in the delegate election process. In the past 2 centuries, amending the Constitution via a similar convention has never happened, with congressional amendments predominating. Although no conventions being perfect opportunities to display express consent, have happened, John Locke would argue that every man having any possession or enjoyment of our government doth thereby give his tacit consent to the laws of that government. Tacit consent is used to rationalize legitimacy of governments, regardless if the citizenry partook in forming them. Thomas Jefferson applied Locke's theory, saying that each generation should have the solemn opportunity to update the Constitution every few decades in order to give the people the chance to exercise express consent.
In modern times, revolutionary principles hold little sway in the government and are in danger. The principle of consent is not being taken into consideration by activist judges utilizing judicial review to advance their own political goals. Judges serve life terms, cannot be voted out, and are extremely unlikely to be impeached. In Obergefell v. Hodges, the Supreme Court seemingly invented rights not enshrined in the Constitution. To preserve the principle of consent, courts should steer clear of political questions and leave legislation to the legislature. The revolutionary principle of a limited national government in the US has faced challenges from federal supremacy, which has trampled over states' rights enshrined in the 10th Amendment. The federal government has encroached on education by withholding grant money from states that fail to institute the Common Core curriculum. The Supreme Court made a mistake in South Dakota v. Dole by allowing the government to withhold grants for legislation unrelated to the purpose of the grant itself. To preserve states' rights, the Supreme Court needs to overturn this decision. The revolutionary principle of natural rights has been trampled on substantially since 9/11. The ACLU notes that the Patriot Act made it easier for the government to spy on ordinary citizens and allowed it to collect their phone records without warrants. This was aided by the third-party doctrine, which holds that people have no expectation of privacy for information they provide to third parties. To restore modern privacy, Congress needs to let the Patriot Act expire. The Supreme Court needs to reject the third-party doctrine.
Fundamental ideals of natural rights, limited government, and consent of the governed must continue to serve as the foundation of our society. It falls on the citizens to ensure that the end of law is not to abolish or restrain, but to preserve and enlarge freedom. Thank you. We are now ready for questioning.
Well, you guys are taking no prisoners as you launch into a discussion of what the Supreme Court has done recently and even arguing what it should do. Which I think gives us some opportunities for wonderful discussions. You began with talking about natural rights, limited government, consent, and then arguing that the British had violated those things. Where did the ideas that natural rights, where did the idea of natural rights originate from? I mean, what is the source of these rights that we are claiming as the patrimony of everyone?
Natural rights philosophy was pioneered by John Locke, but further enshrined in the Declaration of Independence, in which Thomas Jefferson created the American Creed, signifying that all men are created equal and have the natural rights guaranteed to them, those being life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Locke had originally
Locke say that that would support that argument?
Well, John Locke, in his treatise on government, defined similar rights to life, liberty, and property, and those rights were derived from a state of nature, a government existing without, just from people being in nature.
Outstanding. Thank you so much. Michael, can you take the ball and run with it for us?
Yes, I will take the ball and run with it. I feel like I was going to insert a Florida State football joke there, but I am not going to do that. You mentioned Federalist 51 and the division of powers for the government. So how does our federal system help or hinder our ability to gauge the consent of the people?
Our federal system implies the consent of the people through voting. And the way that our federal system works is that we vote for the people in power in Congress and as well as the executive branch. In doing so, this creates more of a balance between the people and the government to consent to whatever they decide to choose through the terms of their power and any discussions leading through that.
In addition, I also believe that it's important, as on top of voting as expressing consent, that you also act in other ways to express consent to our government in their execution of the powers that we give to them when we vote. So when you vote, I believe that you're solely putting a person in a position of authority higher than yourself. but you must exercise consent through either petitioning, writing a recommendation letter to your house, to your state representative, through protesting. These are ways that you can make sure that you check on your government and consent to their execution of using those powers.
So beyond the formal processes of government, most primarily voting, do you all believe that civil disobedience is also consistent with the idea of consent?
Yes. Oh, yes. As we've seen before, when appealing or when rewriting the 19th Amendment for voting rights for women, there was lots of protesting happening during that time. And in order to express their consent for the government, they needed to have women, and as well as men who allied with the women during that time, they needed to have this amendment in order to fulfill their civil duty.
Okay. Let me follow up though. That's again to get the vote. What about beyond voting? Let's say you've already voted or you voted against somebody who's president. After that, do you think that civil disobedience is legitimate and consistent with the idea of giving or not giving your consent?
Indeed, I think we need definitely expression of civil disobedience, as we've seen in the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King definitely followed in Thoreau's example of being disobedient to laws that he felt were unjust. This is essential because it is not always possible to elect representatives that you will consent to. And you need to be able to check laws that they put in place after the voting process.
Add on to my colleague's point, we believe that it's important that civil disobedience be used in conjunction with voting. Civil disobedience can be used to express an idea of consent that legislators can later pick up on. A legislator could understand that the people would withhold their consent in the next election if they do not pass a piece of civil rights legislation or another important piece of legislation that the people would not consent to. Civil disobedience has an important place in American society, but it does not have the place of the predominant ideal of expressing consent in the United States.
With that in mind, the Electoral College seems to be designed to limit the influence of that consent, in the sense that, of course, a voter in Wyoming has far greater representation than is a voter in Florida. That their desires are watered down by fewer people. Should we therefore, in the interest of the consent of the governed, get rid of institutions like that limit the power of consent by getting rid of the Electoral College? What do you think?
Yes, we should get rid of the Electoral College. 60% of Americans oppose the Electoral College. Over 700 amendments have been created to attempt to modify it. So for the same reason that direct election of senators was instituted, we believe that institutions like the Electoral College should give way to better methods of expressing consent so that the doctrine of one person, one vote can apply to institutions like the presidency.
So adding on to my colleague's points, the Electoral College exhibits a lack of correlation between consent of the governed and the amending process. We believe that the convention method outlined in Article 5 must be used in order to change things like the Electoral College.
I was about to ask you a question on that, and you just jumped in there and answered it. That was outstanding. Is Miriam or Michael, do you have any other questions? We have a minute left.
So with the Electoral College, was there any intent in Electoral College to protect the consent of the underpopulated states or states with fewer population?
Ultimately, the creation of the Electoral College was, the idea was to take power away from the people and give it to the delegates who they believe would be better at expressing or better at choosing an ideal candidate for the presidency. We can see that back in the period of state colonial rule, many states had property requirements for voting because they believed that if people did not have property requirements, then they would vote. If many people didn't have property, then they would vote to take away property from the from those who did have property. So for those reasons, we can actually see that.
Time.
If you want to finish that sentence, go ahead.
So for those reasons, we can actually see that it wasn't to protect the underpopulated states, but rather it was just to take away power from the people. And for those reasons, to reach more modern ideas of consent, we should change the Electoral College.
Well, very good. This gives a few minutes now just to give you a bit of feedback. It was a wonderful conversation. It was exciting to be here. I like the fact that you jumped in on some controversial issues like Obergefell, and then we're able to support that with and the Patriot Act. So actually, you took on the left, you took on the right, you took on just about everybody. You supported your arguments with I thought solid evidence. You worked well together, bounced ideas off, and this is a very difficult format in which to make a presentation. I thought you showed mastery of the format in ways that I have yet to be able to do in a year of Zoom meetings. So I am honored to be here with you, and the best of luck. I'll ask my colleagues if you'll give your feedback as well.
Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, the way you came out just with natural rights, limited government, consent to the governed, and then you went into tacit consent and express consent, you really nailed that initial question as far as aligning to the principles of the Constitution, then bringing it into modern examples, as my colleague Tandy said. Other than that, I think this goes along with your content knowledge as well as your mastery of the platform. Really seamless transitions between all of you. It's almost like you're sitting in the same room and it's just a natural flow. So I would say that is very commendable.
I agree. It's not easy to do this virtually. It has some advantages, but for something like this, it's clear that you have worked together closely. Your teacher deserves great respect and appreciation for getting you through this year in the way that you have come together. You speak in unison, as my colleagues already said. I think you covered a lot of terrain, and conceptually, you were very comprehensive. Thank you, and I wish you the best moving forward.
Thank you. Great job.
Yes, thank you. Congratulations on your participation. Wonderful.
Thank you very much. Thank you.